All right. Thank you very much for joining again. This is the third day, I heard today, not the second day, it's the second policy day, but the third day at Arctic Frontiers 2025 Beyond Borders. This is our second day of Arctic Frontiers Offstage, where we try to summarize the big picture sessions and bring in new thoughts, but also provide you who have not been able to come to Tromsø with an idea of what has happened in the big picture. We have just heard about the ocean multi-use for multi-gain big picture session, and I'm here with three wonderful persons to help me to summarize what has happened in the last 90 minutes and provide hopefully some new insights. So I will start to my left, to your right. We have Sigrid Stokke-Nielsen, who is a senior advisor at the Center for the Ocean and the Arctic here in Tromsø. To my opposite, we have Kirsten Steinke, who is a previous international relations and policy fellow at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in Washington, D.C. And to my right, we have Ina Helene Olqvist from SINTEF Ocean. Welcome. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
As you guys know back home, the idea is to really provide a broad summary of what happened. So I took a couple of notes of what we have heard in the session, and we hope we can discuss them. The first one is the ocean is really vital for everyone, for a broad variety of stakeholders, not only in the Arctic, but of course we're here at the Arctic Conference. So Sigrid, how vital is the ocean from your perspective as working for a center on the ocean and the Arctic?
Well, I think the answer is quite obvious. It's it's vital. I think that word is just descriptive enough in and of itself. But it's also like what some of my takeaways from now. Like there are a few keywords that are jumping around in my head, and the first one is knowledge. So everyone was talking about knowledge from an indigenous perspective, knowledge from a business perspective, figuring out what is economically viable, what is ecologically viable. Vitseva, she was talking about a digital twin of the ocean. That is massive. So just I think the need for knowledge and kind of maybe it's like a desperation for more knowledge. It also points to another one of the keywords, which is the whole balancing part. Because I think all of the interests that are reflected in how we look at the ocean, how we work with the ocean, that is a testament to how vital the ocean is. Everyone's interested. We need energy. We need food. We need culture. We need it's vital. But I come out from that session with it feels like a responsibility, because Center for the Ocean and the Arctic, we try to bring together all these stakeholders and talk about these things, and we're actually trying to make the space so that you can make those the balancing act, And I think the Faroe minister, he said it very well. Like it's a very narrow road that you're trying to find your balance on. So I think maybe that's also why everyone's looking for more knowledge, because it's so scary to balance those interests. We're on the clock.
You mentioned already a few things. I mean, let's get back to that later on. Knowledge, bringing people together. The challenges behind those things. But Kirsti, vital. How vital is the ocean, or how vital was the ocean from your previous job, and how vital is the ocean from a U.S. American perspective?
Yeah, appreciate the question, and I appreciate you having me here today. First thing I just want to point out is that everything I say in this interview is just my own personal views. And yeah, that's I feel, a very simple but a very loaded question. So from a personal point for me, my background is in biological oceanography. So I have a PhD, really that focused on ocean and ecosystem health and different factors kind of driving change within an ocean environment. And with that in combination with my most recent position at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is, for those that aren't aware, it's a U.S. federal agency that regulates offshore ocean assets such as marine minerals and energy. So with that position, it really expanded my purview of what the ocean can provide us. And, it's not just the marine life and, the beauty that we enjoy. It's, we benefit from the resources, from the things that the ocean can provide us. And indeed, we need a lot of those resources to continue in the way that we live. So from, across the board, from the life that's there, from the resources it provides, from the food it provides, the ocean is vital to our way of living in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, thank you very much. Same question to the Norwegian participant, to the second Norwegian, sorry. How vital is the ocean from your perspective and maybe from your company Sintef's perspective, the work you do there?
Well, I must say that what I say here is my opinions, of course, but some of the things that both myself and the company do work towards a lot is sustainability. And sustainability means preserve your oceans because of its importance. I mean, both of you came with several good examples for why the ocean is important. And for Norway specifically, historically, the ocean has played such an important role for the ecosystem, for the societies that are here. If we look to the policies that are now in place, many of them do refer to how to keep the lights on in the houses along the coast. It entails fisheries, it entails aquaculture, but we're also looking into new technology and how we can develop technology for a better society. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. You mentioned already something how vital it has been for centuries, you know, and the need for more knowledge. There has also been a need for more knowledge centuries ago. But coming back to that knowledge perspective, there's a lot of data out there. So I would assume there's also a lot of knowledge out there. But it seems to be a challenge is also not to get even more data, more knowledge, but also to bring knowledge together in order to balance different interests. Like, is that a right assessment? Or what's the biggest challenge here on bringing knowledge together, you know, across the Arctic, maybe even outside the Arctic?
I think one of the issues that we do face is that you have a lot of the entities that are have a lot of the very concrete knowledge. They're also businesses.
Yeah, okay.
So you will have done mappings and you've made discoveries, but maybe they are good for your business interests and therefore you do not share them. That could be one point. And also, a lot of the people that we talk to, we've just conducted this a fairly large survey, and a lot of the participants there, they are pointing to the need to share more data. It's a classical thing that comes up, and I think data sharing and the open access to data is really important. But then I think that also makes us more, we need to rely then, or we need to develop our artificial intelligence programs, because I think we're all flooded with information, both in our personal lives, but also professionally, and how to then sort out and how to synthesize all of that data. I think I'm really hoping that the AI developers are doing the right type of work on this. So I think it's really, I think it's an area to really keep an eye out on to see what happens.
Transparency was also mentioned when it comes to gathering data and gathering knowledge. I mean, does any of you have any thoughts on, like, okay, we have more data, and it's necessary to bring it together, you know, but also have a better understanding of what kind of data is actually important and maybe less important. But that transparency point of view, you know, especially after what you mentioned with regard to businesses, you know, maybe keeping some of the data. How important is transparency when it comes to data sharing or knowledge gathering?
Yeah, I mean, it's critical for many reasons. I would say, you know, one of the base reasons is if you're not transparent with your data and if it's not accessible to all and to the parties that need it to draw certain conclusions, you might have duplicative processes, which is then just not helping fill the knowledge gaps. It's just wasting time and resources, right? So you need data transparency, you need data accessibility, and you need data from all sources, which is a lot easier said than done, because as we know, there are many stakeholders involved in the ocean, in the Arctic. And I think, you know, coming from a background of academia and government work, you know, there's a very traditional way of gathering data that people have become accustomed to and are used to, but it doesn't tell us everything. There are a lot of knowledge gaps. So I really can't emphasize enough how we need to, you know, expand and include more of this indigenous knowledge and knowledge from the communities that are living in these areas, so that we can really have the most robust data set available. And we need to, you know, make sure that those data are available to all that need it and are as transparent as they can be.
Do you have an example, maybe, of a practical example of how to gather data from a scientific point of view? That, okay, there is so much data out there, traditional knowledge, but also then, of course, classic data, maybe what we understand as data, you know, numbers and other kind of facts. Like, a practical example of how you get at a different kind of knowledge and data.
First and foremost, I must also mention that I have another hat in addition to my role at SINTEF, and that serves as an IPBES fellow for the methodological assessment on monitoring biodiversity. And one of the parts, or one of the reasons for why I ended up in this position is because we don't have all the data that we need. We don't know everything we don't know what lives in the ocean, all of it, right? I think there used to be a common statement going around that we know more about outer space than our own planet and our own waters. And this is while the majority of the planet is water. It is the ocean, right? So one of the things that's there, which also relates to transparency, is that we need to be transparent in order to know where do we stand right now, where do we have to move from. Like, we don't even know the starting point necessarily. So a practical example for how to then gather the data is, one of the methods is, of course, going over what research exists, and be in contact with companies, be in contact with indigenous peoples and local communities. And this is something that luckily now is being more and more recognized. Also, as part of the IPBES assessment, this is something that is gaining a lot of attention into getting also that data in. And when you're working with a research question to find out something more about the ocean, whether that be who is using it or what purpose does it serve, like carbon sinks, or whether it be fish stocks and dynamics, you first have to formulate the questions before you know which practical approach you need to take. So I think depending on a question, either go out, use samples to find out what exists by quantitative assessments, but just as important, go talk to local people, talk to the industry, talk to indigenous peoples, and ask about their knowledge as well.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So I was thinking about another aspect, and I think it's still a bit new to be thinking in this way, but given the changed geopolitical situation, security situation, there's also this, we have this program in Norway called Mariano. I'm sure some of you know this better than me. I'm not a scientist of training. I'm a political scientist. So, well.
Like me.
But thinking of, where, if you could be more of like an idealist, you would think like full transparency, we get like a full map of the seabed, we share it with everyone who wants to know, like here are our cables, here, and then looking at everything that's happening, in our neighboring countries and very close to us here in Norway, it's like, but we should maybe be a bit more cautious because we don't know the intentions of everyone, reviewing our data. So I think that adds a dimension that's also worth mentioning. Here we are at the Arctic frontiers and with everything happening politically at the moment. So, and I think that will add it will add both an urgency of figuring things out, but it will also mean that we have to be cautious.
It's actually a question I wanted to ask. Are we also transparent when it comes to our interest? What are our clear interests? And we talk a lot about conflict over managing space and resources, but that I think entails, are we transparent about our interests? So I want to come back maybe to that conflict over space and management. As you said, we know some things about the ocean, but definitely not everything, but we know that a lot of different stakeholders are interested in the Arctic. That, as you mentioned, goes also tackles the security point of view, but more from this resource exploration, exploitation, sustainable biodiversity approach. Like how, and maybe coming back to the center of the ocean in the Arctic, what is the best example maybe for conflict, for managing the oceans? We heard about marine spatial planning from the European Union. Anything you could say about management?
I really enjoyed listening to the DG Vicheva talking about how you need to plan for, and she was talking about multi-use and you need to plan for it from the outset. But I think the whole marine spatial plan processes that you kind of, when you're looking to be more detailed about how you use your oceans, it means that you have to map who are all the people with interests in this space. Say that you divide the ocean into, I don't know how many zones or whatever, and then you have a process for each zone. You have to make sure that you then map what are the indigenous interests, the research interests, the fisheries, the traditional, everything, and you bring it together. And I think by having that conversation, and, she said it's taken a lot of time, and, these processes take time. But I think also those are the processes that can reduce conflict, and we can actually try and make these really hard, like, should we do this here or that? Like, doing this means that we need to, put this to the, to put it to the curb or whatever you say. We don't do this here. But making those decisions, those are political decisions, and you need to be brave, and you need to rely on the best available data at the moment, and you might be wrong, and you need to have the bravery to actually then still try and make the best decision based on the data you have.
I guess need to be honest, That was a word we heard yesterday, honesty in the Arctic.
I guess also a point, just to add to that, is that when you're dealing with the ocean as well, we're dealing with an environment that does not take our borders into consideration, which again emphasizes the importance of this cross-border collaboration.
Yeah, and also with climate change, things are moving. Codfish stocks do not live in the same place, the species are moving, and biomass is increasing in some areas, and it's really complicated.
So, something I just want to add that came to mind during this session and in this conversation. Just like a stark example. So, during the previous administration in the U.S., the Biden administration, when I was working for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, I was fortunate enough to work with international colleagues that had a lot to do with offshore wind. That was a big priority for the Biden administration, and we were trying to learn more as a country that was nascent in this industry. And so I got to work with colleagues from Western Europe. And one stark example of multi-use and competing resources within an ocean basin is the North Sea. So I'm sure we're all a little bit familiar with this, but you have offshore wind there, you have fishing interest, you have like marine protected areas that you want to make sure are conserved, and it's really a confined space, right? We know the ocean is dynamic, but the basin itself is only so big. So I think something that I learned a lot from my colleagues there, and that is a hot topic of discussion, is how can we be efficient? When you think about marine spatial planning in a finite area, you really have to see where can we maybe, and we heard this in the session today, where can we maybe stack interests, for example, like co-locating things like offshore wind and aquaculture, and make sure that all the stakeholders are involved in the conversation so that we can do the most with the space that we have.
I mean, we hear a lot about how we have to involve everyone, and how we need to listen to scientists, and how we need to make science more actionable. It's a big talk, and big words, but are we listening to scientists all the time? Like, are we involving them in the processes because of their interests and different interests and understandable different interests, And we have our own interests, I would say, as researchers and scientists. But are policymakers listening from your also professional experience?
Sometimes, I think, will be the key word. We have definitely seen several times that policymakers do make decisions based on science, but it is not always the case. And then there's also cases where you can question whether the policymakers listened enough to the science that was proposed or put forward. One of the sessions that was earlier here was, for instance, on deep sea mining. There's been some controversy on whether the policymakers listened as they should to the science that was presented. So not always.
Not always, yeah.
I think also there's at least sometimes when we speak to different actors who operate along the Norwegian coast, and then you have the regional bureaus and you have the municipalities, like smaller entities that has more of a, lack of a better word, like a random knowledge base. So I've heard aquaculture operators in one region, they have to map all of the coral reefs and all of the cold water because the person working there knows about them. Whereas in the other region, that is not included. The same goes for like seaweed farming. In some regions, it's like really like strict, and you have to assess everything. And then in other regions, it's like measure the current levels, and then you're fine. This is I'm like it's not this is not exact what I'm saying, but I feel that there's some also a lack of knowledge that is equal, so that you not saying that every region is equal and that everything should be equal everywhere, but I feel like there's a randomness also to it that is not good for protection.
Please go ahead.
Well, yeah, so this is a question that resonates with me because it's, the reason that I kind of transitioned from academia into policy was I saw that there was a big disconnect. There still is in a lot of ways. We're working on it, but we need more scientists involved in policy and more policymakers involved with science. So it goes both ways, right? So it's awesome to have, venues like this where all parties are contributing, policy. We've seen and heard from policymakers here, scientists, and this really is the kind of forum that we need to get these conversations going. And, I think from a scientist perspective, something that I'm realizing, and that maybe you've realized as well, is we don't, as researchers, we don't really have the luxury of doing basic science anymore. We use basic science principles, but we need to start doing applied science and continue doing applied science and make it actionable science to solve a lot of these societal issues that we're facing today. So scientists need to increase their political literacy, and politicians need to increase their science literacy. It has to go both ways.
Yeah, and thank you very much for mentioning actually the need to make science actionable, because what does that mean? How does it work on a practical level to make science actionable? You touched upon it, you need to interact with policymakers, but...
Yeah, so related to that point, and also the previous comment that you made on that you can see variations between areas, but I would also say that you could probably see variation also between sectors, depending on where has there been carried out research for longer periods of time, and where do we have this culture of sharing knowledge and listening to each other. So for instance, for me, who work a lot with fisheries and fisheries governance and stakeholders, I have a very positive image from my perspective that we have, for instance, the Directorate of Fisheries are part of several projects together with us. For instance, Horizon Europe projects, where we meet together, we formulate the research questions, we meet the industry, we talk to the industry, the fishers especially, about specific challenges, whether they be technology implementation or suggestions of new policies. And we have a really good collaboration there. So I think it's someone are quite good at this as well. Yeah.
No, I think definitely there are differences between the emergent sectors, and maybe some of the emergent sectors are even better because they, the policies are newer and maybe the structures are less cemented, but
less rigid.
Yeah, exactly. But it's fascinating. I feel like there's like an umbrella or like an overarching issue that's, related to your question, how to make science actionable, because I think we live in a very particular time, we're on the clock. Like we've had this time ticking above our heads for a long time, where the world is going under, climate is collapsing and the nature is disappearing. So that's one of the things. But then we've also have these set targets because we've estimated how we're going to save ourselves. So then all of the innovation has to be in a certain direction. But then also we have the traditional economic constraints and the constraints. So like comparing to other times in history, not that I've lived in those, but I'm imagining, technological innovation was more like, oh, we have this new technology. Let's try this out. Let's see if we can make more money, or let's see if we can, find something cool with like general research. But now we're trying to like put us all into this trajectory that we've decided. And I think that puts some constraints to our human minds. And also I found one of the last points that, what was his name, Lindholm, that he made, laughter. And try to have fun, because I think sometimes this really forced trajectory and this clock that's ticking above our heads is really, it's a heavy burden to carry. So trying to just go for it and do your best, I think that's actually really good advice,
I had a different final question, but maybe we can elaborate on that. Are we becoming too cynical also as researchers, as scientists, and do we need to laugh more, but also, I don't know, have a bit more of a, I wouldn't say, yesterday we talked a lot about be an optimistic realist, like what's the future ahead of what we talked today about, like capacity building, making science more actionable, laugh more. But, what could be a next step, practical? Arctic Frontiers about solutions. So what could be like a practical step in doing something together,
Yeah. I just want to touch on the last point really quickly, and then I'll tackle this to the best of my ability. But I think, saying science is actionable is kind of like one of those buzzword things, but what does that really break down to? And to me, action is the actual act of doing something, right? So in order to make it more actionable, you need to either learn how to yourself or employ people that know how to actually communicate the science to people that have the ability to put it into policy, right? Or communicating with people that have the ability to change policy. So what does that look like? That means translating the science from a very technical viewpoint to outlining why it matters and what it can do for, you know, society and the constituents that policymakers oversee. So it really is breaking through that translation barrier and underlining why it's important and how it can help solve some of the issues that policymakers deal with. So that's just my 2 cents on actionable
businesses.
science. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Both directions.
Yes. Yeah. And then I think, you know, the question of how do we get out of this cynical viewpoint? It's hard to do. You know, it's something I'm sure I would wager everyone at this table has struggled with throughout their life, because it's, you know, we're really passionate about the ocean and the Arctic and our natural environment. But something that has personally really helped me is, you know, obviously I understand the science, I know the facts, I know the trajectory we're heading, but switching from this kind of like doom and gloom, no way out of it spiral to thinking more in a solution oriented perspective, right? So instead of being like, this is where we're headed, thinking, what can we do? And surrounding myself with people that have ideas that can, you know, kind of help us through this time now and in the future. So really trying to put a positive spin on it has been what's allowed me to continue in this career for so long, and I think is what inspires me to do more in the future.
So keeping in mind the problem, but focusing more on the solution. Is that something?
Yeah, and I think this is it's really important, just this point also, because it's if I meet with industry actors and I talk to them about like this dark future ahead, usually that's not the vision they have. They have a good positive. They're opportunists. They're looking for opportunity, and if we're talking about industry actors that interact with the environment, at least from my perspective, they want to preserve the environment. They want to take it. They want to have healthy fish stocks. They want to have clean fjords. They like this is beneficial for them as well. And I think it's important to convey that message too. Yeah.
Work together.
Yeah.
Think about all kind of interest. Thank you very much, guys, for summarizing this session, and also like provide some new insights on how to be a bit more optimistic. Thank you very much for also to all of you to have watched again this nice little gathering here, and I see you later. Thank you very much.